Need some new Modern Horizons cards? Well, you can pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom by heading over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Modern Horizons 2 spoilers. And after the insanity of yesterday with just a ridiculous amount of crazy cards, I thought today might be a lighter day, but I was wrong. We have a ton of stuff to talk about, stuff that's going to shake up Modern and Legacy, stuff that's going to be awesome in Commander, so we should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new Modern Horizons 2 cards. And first up today, we have the Ignoblest of Hierarchs, Ignoble Hierarch, 1 mana, 0/1, Goblin Shaman Exalted, taps to add a black, a red, and a green. If this card looks familiar, it's basically a color-shifted sort of Noble Hierarch. Like, Noble Hierarch, same exact card, different creature types, but it adds green, white, or blue. This is the Jund version of Noble Hierarch, and I think this card is going to be really important for multiple reasons. Noble Hierarch is a modern staple, sees play all the way back to Legacy. It is a really powerful effect. When you think about mana dorks, most mana dorks are 1/1s. Well, Noble Hierarch, I know it's a 0/1, but because of Exalted, it's actually a 1/2 if it attacks. More importantly, it pumps your other stuff, which is the biggest upside. It's like a Birds of Paradise that if you attack with one creature is giving that creature +1/+1. This opens up all kinds of possibilities. Like, one of the biggest upsides of Exalted is it allows your Tarmogoyf to beat your opponent's Tarmogoyf. If you got a Tarmogoyf battle, they're both going to be the same power and toughness. Well, if you have a Ignoble Hierarch, your Tarmogoyf is going to be bigger than your opponent's when it attacks. Same with like Scourge of the Skyclaves, another card that is symmetrical. Yours and your opponent's going to be the same power. Well, if you got an Ignoble Hierarch, this is going to let your Scourge of the Skyclaves win the battle. It'll be interesting to see. I could see this showing up in Jund. I'll have to ask Richard. Richard is the Jund expert, but I could see this being a Jund card. It has played mana dorks at various times in the past, but it's never had a mana dork in its colors as powerful as Ignoble Hierarch. So what do you do with this card? And there are a bunch of different options. I think in some decks, it'll replace Noble Hierarch. In some decks, it'll replace Birds of Paradise. I think that might be its main purpose. If you look at like the Yawgmoth Hospital deck, it's a green-black deck, but it plays Birds of Paradise because it wants a mana dork that adds both of its colors. Well, Ignoble Hierarch is, I would say, a strict upgrade. I know, they're slightly different. Birds of Paradise has mana any color, has flying, but really in the Yawgmoth Hospital deck, you don't really care about any of those things for the most part, so Ignoble Hierarch just gives you a better mana dork to replace Birds of Paradise. Same with like Gruul mid-range Ponza style decks. Those decks often play Birds of Paradise because they want a mana dork that makes red and green. Well, Ignoble Hierarch is perfect for that deck. It makes the colors and it's going to help with your aggressive attacking game plan. I could even see like Naya Winota wanting this as one of their mana dorks over the Birds of Paradise because it's another deck that cares about attacking, so Exalted is good. It still makes most of the colors. The other place that I think we might see this is alongside Noble Hierarch. Like, if you have both of those, that gives you 8 mana dorks to offer Exalted. If you're trying to be aggro with like Infect, or you're trying to be like a Zoo style Wild Mikado beatdown deck, having all these incidental Exalted triggers stacked up on your mana dorks seems incredibly powerful. So I think Ignoble Hierarch is going to see a ton of play. Whether or not it's as good as Noble Hierarch, it's going to depend on the colors of your deck, what deck you're building. But this is an incredibly powerful effect. We have seen Noble Hierarch be incredibly strong, and Ignoble Hierarch is on par. This is not some watered down reprint where, oh, it's like an Ignoble Hierarch, but you gotta suspend it for 4 turns or something. Nothing like that. This is a literal Noble Hierarch with different colors, so I think this card is going to be great. It's going to see a ton of play in Modern, gonna see some Legacy play, probably show up in some Commander decks as well. It is a very, very, very strong effect. We also got one of my personal favorite cards from the set, Harmonic Prodigy. So Harmonic Prodigy, 2 mana, human wizard, prowess, and then the ability that makes it all worthwhile. If an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. It's also a 1/3. So on level 1, This is the new and improved and so much better version of Naban Dean of Iteration. I was super hyped for Naban when Naban was printed, playing like a Wizard Panharmonicon deck with a 2-mana Panharmonicon. The problem with Naban is kind of twofold. One is it's legendary, which makes it really clunky to play a bunch of them, because you really want to sit out on the battlefield, you draw a bunch of them, you kind of lose to the card disadvantage. The other problem is, 1 toughness is brutal in Modern. There's lava darts and gut shots, and there's so many things that can kill a 1 toughness creature. Harmonic Prodigy, it's like Naban, but it's not legendary, and it has 3 toughness, so it dodges a buzz more removal, plus it has prowess itself, which is a pretty reasonable ability, and Harmonic Prodigy does a lot more than Naban. Naban only doubles up enter the battlefield triggers. Harmonic Prodigy has a much broader ability. It just says, if an ability on a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, trigger an additional time. This means, along with doing typical Naban stuff, where you're like playing your Naban, or now Harmonic Prodigy, and playing a Reflector Mage, and doubling up the bounce trigger, like typical Panharmonicon shenanigans, this also works with like Adliz. Adliz has a triggered ability that when you cast an instant or sorcery, you pump all your wizards +1/+1. Well, if you have a Harmonic Prodigy out, now your Adliz is going to be giving those wizards +2/+2. That's insane. Or like Clever Lumimancer. When you cast your copy instant or sorcery, it gets +2/+2. That's going to double trigger. A single spell is going to give it +4/+4. So even though I'm excited about the janky, dirtily Panharmonicon aspects, the most tier and competitive way to play this card is probably going to be with aggressive prowess wizards who trigger when you cast cheap spells in some sort of blitz style deck, wizards beatdown style deck. I think the shaman text is also really interesting. Shaman is a tribe that's close to being good enough for Modern. We have seen the plan of like cast a bunch of burning trees and elvish visionaries and then rage forger to put counters and get a cheap hell rider, be very close to competitive in Modern. Harmonic Prodigy is absolutely insane for the shaman tribal deck. I mean, it doubles up your burning tree emissary, so you're making 4 mana. It turns it into an actual dark ritual, which is absurd. It doubles up your elvish visionaries card draw. It also doubles up your rage forger +1/+1 counter triggers, and it's going to double up the attack triggers, so every time you attack with a shaman, it's going to deal 2 damage. Whether or not this makes shaman into a legit top tier deck, we'll have to wait and see, but it definitely is hugely powerful, and if anything is going to make shaman into a real deck, Harmonic Prodigy is probably it. Also, in Commander, it's kind of weird. I feel like Harmonic Prodigy is a very good Commander card, but it doesn't fit in every deck. The only awkward part of Harmonic Prodigy is wizards in specific are a blue-based tribe. There are Grixis wizards and blue-red wizards, so it's not off-color or anything, but there are wizard stacks like Naban itself or Venser or whatever, where you just can't play Harmonic Prodigy because of its red mana. Not as big of a deal in Modern. You can splash in Modern easy enough, but it's still going to show up in like Anala, Adliz, going to be great in those decks, and even can show up in Shaman Tribal. If you're playing Sakura Deathkeeper, that is a Shaman Tribal Commander that also has a powerful triggered ability. Harmonic Prodigy seems perfect there as well. So I love this card as a dirtily Panharmonicon card, but it's way more than that. Don't get locked into the Panharmonicon aspect. Yes, this is great for dirtling and Panharmoniconing with, but really the scary way to play this card is aggressively doubling up prowess triggers, magecraft triggers, the Shaman ETB damage triggers. That's where Harmonic Prodigy is going to be the scariest. So this card, legitimately exciting. The best Panharmonicon style creature we have ever seen by far, and I think it's actually going to have a chance in Modern. We also got Svyelun, God of Sky and Sea, a Merfolk god. So 3 mana, 3/4, legendary Merfolk god. As long as you control 2 or more other Merfolks, it's indestructible. When it attacks, you draw a card, and other Merfolk you control have ward 1, so if your opponent targets them, they're going to have to pay an extra mana, or the effect gets countered. So Svyelun, how good is this card? Is this going to bring Merfolk back in Modern? And the answer, I think, is complicated. So on one hand, it is a very powerful Merfolk. Like, Merfolk should usually have 2 Merfolks on the battlefield. You're playing a bunch of Lords, so this is going to be even bigger than it looks most of the time. The ward protection ability is nice. Drawing extra cards is nice. Like, it does a lot of things that a Merfolk deck would want. So I think that, on one hand, I would be surprised if some builds of Merfolk aren't playing at least a copy or two. I don't know if you play all 4. It is legendary and going to be indestructible a lot, which is probably going to be a problem if you're playing 4 copies. We also got Rishardan Dockhand, which is another really big card for Merfolk. It almost feels like Wizards looked at the Merfolk deck that has fallen from being legitimate in Modern down to like tier 3 and asked, what can we put into this deck that might give it a shot? And the answers are something like Svyelun, for one, just a really rawly powerful card, and then a better 1-drop, which Rishardan Dockhand I think probably is. Like, is it great? I don't know if it's great, but I think it's better than Merfolk's lacking options. So why am I concerned about Svyelun and Merfolk? And there's a couple of big reasons. One is, if you look at the most recent versions of Merfolk, they've mostly cut 3-drops altogether. Like, older versions of Merfolk, they play a lot of Mirari as like their additional lord. They even played like Capola sometimes, but if you look at the current builds of Merfolk, they're usually trying to get their Aether Vial on 2 and playing all like mostly 2-mana plays for the most part. So is Svyelun, like, if Mirari isn't good enough and Capola isn't good enough, and that's always not good enough because it's not very good, but if Mirari, a really explosive card, isn't good enough, is Svyelun going to be good enough? We'll have to wait and see. Like, does Merfolk want a 3-drop at all? The other reason for this is a lot of the most current Merfolk decks have turned into Lurrus decks, and playing Svyelun or anything that costs 3 or more mana is going to cost you Lurrus as your companion. So not only is the trade like, can I find room? Is it okay with Aether Vial to play Svyelun? But you have the question is it worth playing Svyelun if it costs me the opportunity to have Lurrus as my companion? So that's the other issue. On the other hand, there are 2 semi-popular builds of Merfolk right now. One of them are the super cheap Violon 2 Lurrus a bunch of counterspell builds. The other one is actually trying to get up to 4 mana for Master of Waves, and that is the build of Merfolk where I think Svyelun is going to be great. Svyelun, perfect card to curve into Master of Waves. Double blue mana symbols to power it up. Also going to help protect your Master of Waves. Your opponent's at least going to have to spend more mana thanks to Ward if they want to kill it and get rid of all the elementals. So I think when it comes down to it, Svyelun is a powerful Merfolk. I don't think it's so powerful that every Merfolk deck is going to start playing 3-drops, drop Lurrus, and just be like Svyelun Tribal. I don't think it's that busted. It's a strong card, no doubt, and it has amazing Zev McKinnon art, but I don't think it's so strong that you're just going to totally go back to the drawing board, drop your Lurruses, and play this in every Merfolk deck. On the other hand, if you are a non-Lurrus Merfolk deck, like the Master Waves build, I think Svyelun is a pretty easy inclusion in your 3-drop slot because it is a really powerful effect in a deck that's full of Merfolk. Next up, oh boy, we have a controversial card, Gaea's Will. So Gaea's Will, a green no mana cost sorcery, suspend 4 for 1 mana. When it resolves until end of turn, you can play land cards and cast spells from your graveyard. And if a card would be put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile that card. The text might seem familiar. It's a Yawgmoth's Will. It is essentially a green suspend version of Yawgmoth's Will. And the fact that Gaea's Will is green is the biggest thing that I've heard complaints about. Is Gaea's Will a color pie break? And I can see why people would immediately head this direction with their analysis of the card, because Yawgmoth is a black card, and this is essentially Yawgmoth, but a green card. On the other hand, I don't know, like, green has a long history back to the earliest days of Magic of recurring stuff from the graveyard. Regrowth, Eternal Witness, Praetor's Council. When I look at Gaea's Will, I kind of see the same thing. Like, sure, there's a twist. You got to play the spells this turn. When Regrowth puts a card in your hand, and you can hold on to it for future turns. Same with Eternal Witness or Praetor's Council, which actually make Gaea's Will less powerful in some ways because there's a timing restriction. But really, to me, this doesn't seem like a color pie break. I can see why people are weirded out because it is a green Yawgmoth's Will, but still, like, green plays stuff from the graveyard, and I don't see how there's a huge difference between Gaea's Will, cast a Ponder from my graveyard, or Regrowth, put Ponder in my hand, cast the Ponder. Like, when it comes down to it, it's still the same. You're still gonna need to cast a spell from your graveyard. There's just an extra step with something like Eternal's Witness. So I don't really get the color pie break criticism. As far as how good this card is, that is a really tough question. So Yawgmoth's Will is busted. It is a busted card. It is banned in Legacy. It is restricted in Vintage. Being able to replay your graveyard can do crazy things with cards like Lion's Eye Diamond that sacrifice themselves, with rituals often played in Storm-style decks as a finisher where you just like make a bunch of mana, LED a couple times, Tendrils or Grape Shot or empty the Warrens. Gaia's Will could do the same thing. It has the same text as Yawgmoth's Will. The problem is it's a suspend card, so we haven't really seen suspend cards with no mana cost be played fairly. That's just something we've never really seen be a competitive thing. Like the idea of, okay, I'm going to restore balance, suspend it for 6 turns, and then get ya. Or a Living End, suspend it for 3 turns, and then reanimate everything. Or even Crashing Footfalls. All these cards are cheated into play typically by As Foretold, or Bloodbraid Elf, or Electro Dominance. And the question is, if you're playing the kind of deck that would want Gaia's Will, some sort of Storm-style combo deck primarily, is it going to be worth adding these cards to your deck? Are you going to warp your deck to play As Foretold or Electro Dominance, especially when you already got Past in Flames? Like, is Gaia's Will a big enough upgrade over Past in Flames for the typical Storm deck that you're going to want to add another color to your deck potentially, add ways to cheat it into play potentially? Is that even going to be worth it? I'm not sure, especially considering it does have the same weakness of Past in Flames, and if you're playing a Storm deck, people are already going to sideboard in their hate cards for your graveyard to stop Past in Flames, so they're going to just accidentally hate on Gaia's Will as well. On the other hand, there are some graveyardy ways to cheat this into play that might be the most exciting. Like, maybe rather than being a Storm deck, you play Gaia's Will in a graveyard-filling Cathartic Reunion, Stitcher Supplier style deck, where your plan is just to stock your graveyard, and then Dreadhorde Arcanist back at Gaia's Will, or Finalia Promise 2-mana Gaia's Will, and replay a bunch of the stuff from your graveyard, not necessarily to win the game with a Storm combo, but just for value. Like, if you can cast this for free with Dreadhorde Arcanist, and you got all your mana up, and you're able to, like, replay a creature, maybe Thoughtseize your opponent, maybe Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt something, and that's your turn, that's still pretty bonkers. So maybe this isn't a combo card in the way Will is because of Suspend, but a build around value-y style card. So Gaia's Will, I mean, it harkens back to one of the most powerful cards in Magic's history. It is that card with Suspend. It is exciting. I'm just not sure how people are going to use it. So I think that Gaia's Will, it is a really powerful effect. I just don't know where it goes yet. So we'll have to wait and see if people can find a way to make it work. But the effect is so powerful and has so much history behind it, I expect that someone will. We also got Obsidian Charmaw, which is a card that I really like. So Obsidian Charmaw, 5-mana 4/4 dragon. It costs 1 less to cast for each land your opponent controls that could produce colorless mana. It has flying, it's a 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you blow up a non-basic land an opponent controls. So when you read this, a dragon that gets cheaper based on colorless lands, it seems like the idea is for it to be Tron hate, although I don't actually know if this is that good of Tron hate. I've played a lot of land destruction and Blood Moon decks against a lot of Tron decks many, many times. If there's one matchup I know well, it's trying to blow up lands against Tron. And the thing about land destruction in Blood Moon effects against Tron is 3-mana land destruction, or even Blood Moon, which costs 3 mana, is risky because whether or not it's going to be effective depends on who gets to play first. Let's say your plan is to use Obsidian Charmaw to keep your opponent off Tron. Your opponent wins the die roll. They go Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine. You have your Obsidian Charmaw in hand. They have 2 colorless lands, but you have 2 mana. Your dragon costs 3 mana. Your opponent untaps last Tron piece, Karn, and then sure, you can play the Charmaw and blow up a land, but they already got the Karn or the Worm Coil, so it's going to be too late. On the other hand, if you're on the play, it's insane, and it does pretty much beat Tron. Not like literally beat it. They can always draw into another Tron land, but if you're the one on the play, they're going to play 2 Tron pieces. You're going to have 3 lands on your third turn. You can blow up one of the Tron lands, put your opponent down to 1 land, and then Charmaw probably wins. So it can be good against Tron, but just keep that in mind. This is not just game over against Tron, because it is play draw dependent. On the other hand, there are other decks that play colorless lands. Not a lot of them, but this does seem really good against Eldrazi Tron, maybe Cloudpost in Legacy. The problem is, most decks aren't going to give you a discount on this. Most of the time, this is going to be 4 or 5 mana. If you look through the lands that see play in formats like Modern, there's really not a lot of like pain lands. Cavern of Souls, I guess, is a land that does give a discount, so that's something. But for the most part, people are playing fast lands, shock lands, fest lands, some of the horizon lands that sack to draw a card, none of which actually make colorless mana. So in a lot of matchups, this is going to be 5 mana, but I think that's fine in some decks. Actually, the place I'm most excited to play Obsidian Charmaw is in land destruction decks, like Ponza style decks. We have played, not that long ago on stream, Boros Land Destruction, the deck that's using like Boom Bust to try to blow up a land on turn 2 with an indestructible land, pillages. It even plays like Goblin Dark Dwellers to flash back the pillages or Stone Raids to blow up another land. This deck already gets better because of the artifact lands, which are indestructible. Just a little clarification based on yesterday's video. We kind of missed the indestructible part. So it already gets better by having more indestructible lands to work with Boom Bust. Most importantly, Obsidian Charmaw seems like just a better Goblin Dark Dweller. So if you're playing Goblin Dark Dwellers as your finisher, rather than trying to flash back a pillage to blow up a land, you can just play a 4/4 flyer for 5 and blow up a land naturally and have a better clock that's more evasive than Goblin Dark Dwellers. And the Boros Land Destruction deck in specific, its biggest problem is its win condition is kind of opponent scooping out of boredom. Like, it does not close out the game very quickly, very well, which gives your opponent a lot of time to draw back into it. So you're mostly hoping you blow up so many lands that your opponent just gives up. But Obsidian Charmaw could be a great way to actually be able to close out the game that doesn't care about the graveyard like Goblin Dark Dweller. I think the same might be true in Gruul Ponza, where you just play this naturally, like a bigger, you don't have to sack it Fulminator Mage, where you can play this very quickly thanks to Arcbound and Utopia Sprawl, which you're already playing to ramp into Pillage and Stone Rain and those kind of cards, Molten Rain on turn 2, and then you might sometimes just turn 3 Obsidian Charmaw. Can it beat out the other finishers in Gruul Ponza, like Glorybringer or Stormbath Dragon? Not exactly sure. It does offer less immediate damage, it doesn't have any like removal or removal protection, but blowing up a land is on theme, and it is a really powerful effect. So whether or not this is good as Tron Hate, I'm leaning towards it can be, but it's inconsistent. I don't think I'm going to play 4 Charmaws in my sideboard and have that be my answer to Tron. On the other hand, as a finisher in a Ponza style deck, I think this card is super powerful, and if you're already playing it because you're a land destruction deck, you get the upside of sometimes just blowing out Tron with a 2-mana 4/4 that destroys a Tron land as well. We also got Calibrated Blast, which feels like a sweet against the odds card. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land. Put the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in a random order, and when you reveal a non-land this way, it deals damage equal to the card's mana value to any target. Flash it back for 5 mana. So this is a bird spell that could deal a ridiculous amount of damage. Whether or not it's actually going to be playable, I'm kind of skeptical. But what I'm seeing with this card is like Worldly Tutor, Calibrated Blast is like a 2-card combo. You Worldly Tutor, put Emrakul on top of your deck, instant speed, 3 mana, 15 damage burn spell, in a world of fetch lands and shock lands and incidental damage, that probably just closes out the game. Or maybe you like Mystical Tutor and enter the infinite to the top of your deck, and then Calibrated Blast, and then you're getting 12 damage to hopefully close out the game. So I don't think this is a bird spell that's good as he play in top tier decks. I think that if you're playing this fairly, it's just going to be super inconsistent. Like, imagine a deck that's just playing a traditional curve of cards from like 1 to 5 mana. This just doesn't do anywhere near enough, even with flashback to be in the conversation. But if you want to build around it, there is janky 2-card burn you out of the game potential. I think that's really exciting. I can imagine this being an awesome against the odds card, good for maybe like random commander decks, but I don't think it's an actual like competitive burn spell. Next up, we have our new best reanimation spell, mostly in Modern, Persist. So Persist, 2-mana sorcery, choose target non-legendary creature in your graveyard, return it to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. So this is our modern version of Animate Dead. And now, thanks to Modern Horizons 2, Modern has its own twist on not only Animate Dead, a super strong, one of the best reanimation spells in history, but it also has its own version of Entomb and Unmarked Grave. Sure, it's more expensive, it's slower, but still, this is more efficient than anything we've seen for a modern style reanimation deck, which is pretty exciting. Of course, these cards have one huge drawback from a purely spike perspective, which is they can't get legendary creatures. Neither Unmarked Grave or Persist can do anything with legends, which makes the cards way less powerful. On the other hand, I think it's actually a really good thing. One of the things that I strongly dislike about how cheat stuff into play decks have developed over the last decade or so is Wizards printed 2 cards really, and you could argue Iona is maybe the third, but they printed 2 cards that are just so much better than everything else, in Griselbrand and Emrakul, that if you're going to cheat things into play with reanimation or show and tell or sneak attack, it is right to use these cards every single time. Like, there's no choice to be made. And the same thing would happen in Modern if we had actual Entomb and Animate dead. You know how your Modern reanimation deck would work? 100% of the time, it would be correct to get Griselbrand or maybe Iona, and nothing else would even be in the conversation because Griselbrand is so busted and Iona is so busted, and if you can somehow instant speed reanimate Emrakul, it is also so busted. But thanks to this non-legendary restriction, things are actually very interesting for Persist, and there's a ton of choices to be made. So now, a lot of reanimation targets that used to be good enough, but have been beaten out by the Griselbrands and Emrakuls of the world, are suddenly in the conversation. Like Tidespout Tyrant, that used to be a legit thing to reanimate in Legacy, or Inkwell Leviathan, 7/10, Island Walk, Trample Shroud, or Sphinx of the Steelwind with pro red and green and lifelink great against aggro. Now there's actually deck building that needs to take place in your reanimation deck. You have to choose which of the finishers is going to be good enough for your deck, and there's still very powerful things. I mean, this can still get It That Betrays in some of the lesser Eldrazi. It can get Sire of Insanity to wipe people's hands. It can get Craterhoof Behemoth potentially on turn 2. So even though these cards are not as good as Griselbrand, they're not instant win the game, they're not Emrakul annihilating you and closing out the game on the spot, they're still very powerful, very legitimate targets that are worth cheating into play, and that makes me super excited for this card, that we actually have to think about what we're going to cheat into play with it. The other thing I'm excited about is we've played this Footsteps of the Goryo reanimation deck, which is absolutely hilarious. It's like land destruction reanimator, with the idea being you like get Ashen Rider in your graveyard, you Footsteps of the Goryo it, you exile land when it comes into play, and then it has to sacrifice, and you exile land when it leaves play, then you do it again, and just eat away your opponent's resources. Also use like Woodfall Primus, can use Terastodon. I think that Persist is perfect for a deck like that, with the exception that it's a little awkward with Woodfall Primus because you don't really want the -1/-1 counter on it, but still, with the combination of Persist in Footsteps of the Goryo and these cards, I think that could be an actual like legitimate reanimation strategy. The biggest problem with Footsteps of the Goryo isn't that it's bad in a deck like the kill your own stuff reanimator land destruction deck we're talking about, it's that there's not a great backup. Persist is the perfect backup, and honestly even better than Footsteps of the Goryo most of the time. The other thing is, you don't necessarily gotta reanimate something that's just I win the game. Like, this is a card that can snag Grave Titan or Primeval Titan, and those are really powerful effects. Sure, they're not Griselbrand, just killing you immediately, but still a Grave Titan is probably gonna win the game. Primeval Titan can tutor up whatever combo lands, potentially win you the game. So I love Persist. Even though it's less powerful with the non-legendary restriction, it's way more fun. It is still an incredibly powerful card. The only drawback is, in Modern, decks are prepared for graveyards, so there is a natural defense that's already in place because of decks like Dredge, other graveyard-style decks, that most decks are going to have Rest in Peace or Tormod's Crypt or Surgical Extraction, something. So I don't think these decks are just going to break the format, but it is a really powerful effect, and we might have legitimate reanimator in the format now. Plus, I mean, if you're playing a commander deck, probably going to be part of your reanimation package there as well. We also got a new Elder Dragon in Piru the Volatile. So Piru, this calls back to the original Elder Dragons. 8 mana, including 2 red, 2 white, 2 black, so a Mardu Elder Dragon. It is an Elder Dragon. It's a 7/7. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gotta sacrifice it unless you pay a red, a white, and a black, and then when it dies, it deals 7 damage to each non-legendary creature. I absolutely love the design on this card. This is not a card that I think is going to be Modern playable. I think it is a fun commander card, but this, again, harkens back to the start of everything as far as Commander, Elder Dragon, Highlander. This is formatted like the original Chromiums, Nicol Bolas, Vivictus Asadamis, Palladium Wars, like all these really sweet iconic cards from the earliest years of Magic. This is an updated take on them, and if you look at these Elder Dragons, their biggest problem is the ability where you gotta pay 3 or sacrifice them each turn. But with Piru, this drawback might actually be an upside, because when it dies, you deal 7 damage to each non-legend, so choosing not to pay to get a pseudo wrath out of it is actually really awesome. That's part of why I love this card. Wizards found a way to take this drawback and turn it into a potential upside, which makes Piru a little bit like a Nevenerol. It could be a repeatable wrath, not as strong of a wrath, because it only hits non-legends, only hits creatures. At the same time, Piru's lifelink does work with its ability, so if this dies, and there's 7 creatures that are not legendary on the battlefield, you're going to gain like 50 life. It's going to be insane. Like, you're going to gain so much life to stabilize, which makes it even more powerful. The other thing is, if you're playing a Piru deck in Commander, you're probably building around it. You're probably playing like Mardu Legends. You get all the legendary matter stuff. You'll play mostly legendary creatures. So in some ways, this will be a one-sided wrath. Of course, your opponent's legends won't die either, so it's not going to kill everything, but you should be able to build your deck in a way where you have legendary synergies, your creatures are pretty much all legends, and then Piru is all upside. So I love this card. It calls back to some of the most iconic creatures and important creatures thanks to their influence in creating the Commander format in all of Magic. It takes this really weird downside, flips it into an upside, and it's pretty powerful. So not a card I'm super interested in for non-Commander formats, but in Commander, I really like this one. We also got Lonis, Cryptozoologist, 2-mana Simic, legendary elf scout. You get a 1/2. It has an ability where whenever another non-token creature enters a battlefield under your control, you investigate. So you get a clue token, pay 2, sack it, draw a card, and then it has an ability where you can tap it, sack X clues, and have target opponent reveal the top X cards from their library, and you can put a non-land permanent with mana value X or less from among them on the battlefield under your control. The rest go to the bottom. This is one of the most fun commanders that I have seen in a while. I absolutely love commanders that make archetypes that were not previously playable. And I think that investigate / coup tokens is on that list. There's not an actual commander for a clue token deck. That's just not something that we have. Now we have Lonis, which is not just a commander for it. It's making clues. It's giving you a payoff for clues. So as far as non-commander play, I mean, I guess you could try to build a clue deck with tireless trackers and Thraben inspectors and make clues and steal some of your opponent's stuff. But honestly, I don't think this card is designed to be played in Modern or Legacy. Like, could you build a fun, like, semi-competitive deck around the theme? You certainly could, and stealing your opponent's stuff is fun, but I don't think that's its goal. I think this is to be a investigate / clue token commander. In Commander, there are a ton of ways to repeatedly make clues. You have like ongoing investigation to make clues. You got Uvenwold Mysteries, works great with Lonis. You get a token when the creature comes into play, and then when a non-token dies, you get another one. Trail of Evidence, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you get a clue. So there's definitely ways that if you build around this, you can make a lot of clues, and every turn cycle be stealing something massive from your opponent's deck, which is already a really fun playstyle for Commander. So Lonis, not a card I am really considering for formats like Modern, but it is a super fun, really spicy, brand new card for Commander that I cannot wait to build around. Speaking of Legends, we have one that I actually am more excited about for Modern than Commander. General Ferrous Rokiric. So General Ferrous, 3-mana, Boros, legendary human soldier. It's a 3/1. It has hexproof for mono-colored, and whenever you cast a multicolored spell, you make a 4/4 white golem artifact creature token. Oh, this card is actually very powerful. So it reminds me a little bit of Hero Precinct 1. Hero Precinct 1, same ability, you cast a multicolored spell, you get a token, except for 1 more mana, you're getting a 4/4 token out of General Ferrous rather than a 1/1 human. That is a massive upgrade. Like, it does not take many multicolored spells with General Ferrous on the battlefield for you to just win the game. The other thing about General Ferrous is, in a format like Modern, it's going to be really difficult to kill with removal. Hexproof from monocolored might not sound like much, but that means almost all the most played removal spells in the format, Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, Path to Exile, Dismember, Lava Dart, can't target General Ferrous. Not that it's unkillable, like it still gets got by Renin 6 or Assassin's Trophy or Kolaghan's Command, but those are lower tier, lesser played removal spells. So there's a decent chance in Modern, if you get this on the battlefield, it's going to stick around, and then it provides an absurd payoff. I think there's a couple of different ways that you can build around this. One is you can try to maximize your General Ferrous and be essentially a combo deck, where you're trying to like play General Ferrous and then like Manamorphose, make a Golem, Manamorphose, make a Golem, Burning Tree Emissary, make a Golem, Scarsale Ritual, counter on something, make another Golem, and just try to make a ton of Golems, like General Ferrous Golem Storm, essentially, where you're trying to do all this in one turn. Could that plan work? It could, but I don't think it's really necessary. I think you can play this more fairly in a deck that just has a lot of good multicolor cards, like playing this off of Noble Hierarch or Ignoble Hierarch on turn number 2, and then playing Knight of the Reliquary. Get a 4/4 kicker. Voice of Resurgence, get a 4/4 kicker. Maybe you still play Burning Tree Emissary just because it's good, Unsettled Mariner, and then for removal you get like Lightning Helix, Dreadbore, Assassin's Trophy. Could show up in the 5-color Niv deck. Like a lot of these cards could go in the Niv deck. General Ferrous seems like a really sweet backup plan for 5-color Niv. And there are some other multicolor payoffs. If you want to go jankier, like Knight of New Alara, gonna pump your multicolor creatures for each of its colors. You get Pillar of the Perubs to cast your stuff. If you want to go really deep, Tome of the Guild for card advantage, probably more commander level stuff than modern stuff, but I actually think that General Ferrous Rokiric has potential to show up in modern, either creating its own brand new archetype or in the 5-color Niv decks. The fact that it's so resilient to the popular removal is really what sells me on this card. Like, it's a card that needs to sit out for a couple turns, but it's a card that probably will sit out for a couple turns because the removal people playing can't actually target it, and if this sits out in a deck that you build with a ton of multicolor stuff, it's going to be insane and make a huge board of Golems that can win the game in just a couple of turns. So I love this card. This card is super fun. Oh yeah, in Commander, you can also play it for Golem Tribal. We've seen like all of these random, like it's a 1/1 that makes a 3/3 Golem, like Blade Splicer style effects. There's a whole bunch of those, mostly in white, but also in some other colors as well. General Ferrous Rokiric seems like a cool option for that as well, since it refers to Golems, even though it doesn't specifically work with that plan. But General Ferrous Rokiric, a card I'm really hyped for Modern, and some Commander potential too. We also got a weird one that I think is actually pretty good in Disapprove. So Disapprove, 2 mana flash enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. So that's already sweet. It replaces itself. It makes it so creatures lose all abilities, but then you gotta sacrifice it at the end step. So this is an enchantment that for 1 turn will make creatures lose abilities. So it's kind of like this weird stifly style effect, but it does have flash, it does replace itself, and in some decks, going to the graveyard actually an upside rather than sitting on the battlefield. So level 1 of Disapprove is you just play it in response to an ETB creature. Your opponent plays Cloud Blazer, and you're like, I disapprove of that. Cloud Blazer is still going to come into play. Opponent's still going to get a 2/2 flyer, but it's not going to have any abilities, so there's no card draw, no life gain. Same with like Ravenous Chupacabra, isn't going to be able to kill your stuff. So that's just the boring, simple way. Stifling essentially ETB triggers and drawing a card in the process. The more exciting way to play Disapprove is to use it to make your own cards better. Let's say you want to play a Kroxa. Kroxa sacrifices itself unless you escape it. Well, if you can Disapprove, Kroxa's going to lose all abilities, including the ability where it has to sacrifice itself, so you can keep your Kroxa around for 2 mana. Or like Haunted Whore normally gives your opponent 2/3/3 Centaurs, so you just really can't play it. But if you Disapprove first, it loses that ability for the turn, so you're just going to get a 2 mana 7/7. Or Phyrexian Dreadnought, the ultimate dream. 1 mana for Dreadnought, 2 mana for Disapprove. You keep your Dreadnought forever because it's not going to have the sacrifice a bunch of stuff abilities. 1 mana 12/12. So there's shenanigans there. Also in Modern, maybe the most competitive way to play this, and we'll see if it actually takes off, might be in some sort of like Lurrus Death Shadow deck. It's kinda hilarious with Death Shadow itself, where Death Shadow, its ability is it gets -X, where X is your life total. If you Disapprove, your Death Shadow is always going to be a 13/13 until end of turn. Not as synergistic with Scourge of the Skyclaves because of its star thing, losing all abilities means it's going to die, but it works really well with Death Shadow, and Lurrus Loris loves cards that draw a card and loop from the graveyard. We see this with Mishra's Bobble in specific, where a lot of decks play that combo, where you bobble, draw a card, Loris, cast Bobble again, draw another card. Disapprove does cost 2 mana, but it does keep putting itself in the graveyard. So with Loris, every turn you cast it, you're drawing an extra card, building that Howling Mine, and maybe growing your Death Shadow, shutting down some of your opponent's stuff, which is very, very powerful. There's also some really funny situations where your opponent, like, through the Breaches or Goryo's Vengeance, let's say a Grizzlebrad, to cheat it into play, if you Disapprove with the Breach or the Vengeance on the stack, your opponent's still going to get the Grizzlebrad, but it's not going to have any abilities. So it doesn't have lifelink, it doesn't draw a ton of cards and win the game, and it still has to get sacrificed at the end of turn. Same with, like, Emrakul. Sure, your opponent's going to have a 15/15 ground creature that hopefully you can just chump block or take the 15, but you're not going to get annihilated or anything like that. So I think that Disapprove has some fun build-around potential with your own negative ETBs. It also might have some competitive potential with, like, Death Shadow and Loris, plus it's an interesting hate card, which you kind of get is a free upside if you have this in your deck. Like, if you're playing this to, I don't know, keep your Croxa around or combo with Loris, sometimes you're just going to blow out the instant speed reanimator deck or whatever. So I really like this card. It's weird, it's unique, but cheap enchantments that say draw a card on them always have potential. Like, replacing itself is a really big deal. So will this card show up in a ton of top tier decks? Maybe not, but it's certainly one to keep in mind because it does do a lot of different cool things. We also got Academy Manufacturer, which is just a super fun card. So a little 3 mana assembly worker artifact creature. You get a 1/3. More exciting, if you'd create a clue, food, or a treasure, instead you get one of each. So you make a treasure, you also get a food and a clue as a bonus, or vice versa. So is this card competitive? I would be surprised, but it seems like a spectacularly fun card to play in Commander, especially because it's pretty easy to make treasure tokens and kind of tricky to make the other two. Like, imagine casting a Brass's Bounty. You're going to be getting most likely a minimum of 7 food, treasures, and clues. That's 21 tokens. Or like Dockside Extortionist, that already makes a ton of treasures for 2 mana. Imagine that with an Academy Manufacturer out, so you're getting a ton of food and clues as well, or Hull Breacher or Smothering Tithe. So this is going to put a ton of artifact tokens on the battlefield, and it does turn on some synergies. We were talking about Lonis earlier, which wants to sack clues to steal your opponent's stuff, or like Tamio's Journal. If you can sack 3 clues, you get to tutor a card directly into your hand. With Academy Manufacturer, you can make treasures since they're easiest and cheapest to make, but then also get bonus clues to support these synergies. That also works with things that care about tokens. Like, can you imagine a Doubling Season or Anointed Procession or even a Chatterfang making squirrels with Academy Manufacturer going, you're going to get so many tokens on the battlefield. The other thing is, these are all artifacts, and that opens up some synergies. Like, sure, clue tokens do things, draw you cards. Food token can do things, gain you life. Treasure tokens can do things, make you mana. But maybe the way you use this is like this weird artifact token combo deck where you're trying to make a bunch of artifact tokens to burn your opponents out with Reckless Fireweaver. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, 1 damage to each opponent. If you can cast like a Dockside and maybe a Brass's Bounty with Academy Manufacturer out, you're going to make so many artifact tokens that you probably just win. Or like Marxus of Keld gets power and toughness based on the number of untapped artifacts, creatures, and lands you control. Well, you're going to have a lot of untapped treasures, clues, and food sitting around, so it's just going to be absolutely massive. Or like Tezzeret, Master of Bridge, gives creatures and planeswalkers affinity for artifacts. So you have all these artifacts, all your stuff is going to be ridiculously cheap. Or Rise and Shine, can you imagine overloading that with like 20 artifact tokens on the battlefield? All of them becoming 4/4s, you just kill everyone all at once. So Academy Manufacturer, this card just seems like a blast to play. If you're playing a treasure deck, or a clue deck, or a food deck, a commander, this goes in it. Don't think it's going to see play in constructed 60 card formats, but for like semi-competitive casual play, it's just a really, really fun card. We also got Yaivmaya, Cradle of Growth. So Yaivmaya, a legendary land that says each land is a forest in addition to its other types. That's right, it is green Urborg. Urborg has been a card that's seen a lot of play for a long time in a lot of formats. Well, now green can do it too. I guess one of the themes of Modern Horizons 2 is green doing black things. Even though I'm mostly joking, I don't think Urborg is a black effect. We've seen like Realm Walker as a blue version of it. So what do you do with Yaivmaya Cradle of Growth, and the main purpose, I think, is to turn colorless lands into colored sources. So if you're playing a mono green deck and you want to play a bunch of wastelands or mutavaults or nykthoses, Yaivmaya is a nice bonus over one of your forests, because then suddenly you can tap all your colorless lands for your primary color of mana. As far as actual modern play, the most obvious home is probably like a one of in Tron, where you turn all of your Tron pieces into forests so you can make green mana in a pinch if you need to. It is legendary, and we've seen this with Urborg as well, that you normally can't play 4 of these unless you're a very specific archetype that can like discard them because of the legend rule. But still, I think this will show up as a one of in a ton of decks. On the other hand, Urborg's primary purpose in Commander is to combo with Cabal Coffers. Like, sure, you can just play it for value, but the main reason you play it is to make sure all your lands are swamps, to make Cabal Coffers go off, and there isn't a green Cabal Coffers yet. I mean, they'll probably spoil one tomorrow, and then Yaivmaya Cradle Growth will be absurd, but until green also steals Cabal Coffers, it's a little less exciting than Urborg. There are synergies, though, like Nissa doubles up your forest mana, or Vernal Bloom, or Arbor Elf can untap forests. With a Yaivmaya out, suddenly these cards work with everything, and like Arbor Elf being able to untap Nykthos, that is legitimately scary. So there are synergies for this card. You can also use it just to grow your creatures. Dungrove Elder, Dauntless Dowerbark, Collodion Twingrove all care about how many forests are on the battlefield. Sure, you could play all actual forests, or you can play whatever dual lands you want, play a Yaivmaya, and still max power all of these cards. So Yaivmaya, I like this card. I know there's going to be complaints about green doing too much, and I think that is a legit issue, but Yaivmaya itself, it's a cool reference, it's a cool color shift, and I think it is definitely going to see play, although I do think, because there's no green Cabal Coffers, it's probably a little bit less powerful than Urborg itself, but still a really powerful effect. We also got Territorial Kavu, which is a pretty good Magic card. So 2 mana, a red and a green, you get a star. Its power and toughness is equal to the number of basic land types among lands you control. When it attacks, choose one. Discard a card, and if you draw a card, or exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. So Territorial Kavu, it seems built to be in a Domain Zoo style deck. We talked about this a little bit yesterday in regards to Scion of Draco, but with the combination of Triomes and Shock lands and Fetch lands, you should be able to have all 5 basic land types on the battlefield on turn 2, which makes Territorial Kavu a turn 2 5/5 with a bunch of upsides, looting away cards you don't want to find what you want, hitting the graveyard. So if there was ever a card that was going to make Domain Zoo a thing again, I think Territorial Kavu might be it. Like, imagine a deck that's playing not only Territorial Kavu, but playing other aggressive creatures, like your Wild Nacatl is a 1 mana 3/3. You got a bunch of really big creatures, you can back them up with domain spells like Tribal Flames, 2 mana, 5 damage if you got all the land types, or Might of Alara, 1 mana, pump +5/+5 if you have all the land types. So I could see some sort of Domain Zoo 5-color beatdown shenanigan deck being a thing again, thanks to Territorial Kavu. Those decks have been close, so close in the past, and maybe this is a little boost of power needed to make Domain Zoo a thing again. So I think Territorial Kavu, it's a strong card. It is narrow. I think you're going to want to be playing a 5-color deck to fully power it, even at a, like, 2 mana 3/3, it's not that exciting in Modern, but if you can get it up to 4 or 5 power early in the game consistently, it's a pretty legitimate threat. Moving into the world of lower rarity cards and reprints, there's a ridiculous amount of cards today. There's so much stuff to round out the limited format. Some of it's pretty interesting, but again, it's been a long spoiler day. We can't go over each of these cards one by one, but there are a few I wanted to mention briefly. Arcbound Mouser, a straight upgrade on Arcbound Worker, as long as having white mana isn't a concern. Essentially, you get lifelink for free, so if a modular deck's a thing, this is probably going to be a part of it. Worth keeping in mind for decks like Hardened Scales, if you can make the mana work. We also got Bone Shards, which I think is actually a really good card. It's like Black Lightning Axe. 1 mana, it is a sorcery that is a drawback. As an additional cost, sack a creature or discard a card, destroy target creature or planeswalker. Lightning Axe sees a reasonable amount of modern play, mostly in decks that want to be discarding Hollow One or to get a Dredger in the graveyard. I feel like Bone Shards can basically fill that same role in decks that don't have red mana, and it's even harder removal. You straight up kill a thing rather than just dealing 5 damage. We also got everyone's favorite meme, Phantasmal Dreadmaw. We might not have actual Colossal Dreadmaw in the set, but we can't get away with no Dreadmaw. So Phantasmal Dreadmaw, it is the blue illusion version of Colossal Dreadmaw. I mean, it's also a 4-mana 6/6 trample. Of course, if it's targeted by a Lavadar or anything, it's going to die, but still. Cool to see Phantasmal Dreadmaw is a reference to everyone's favorite meme dinosaur. We also got Dragon's Rage Channeler, which is an interesting red 1-drop. So 1 mana 1/1. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Surveil 1, so filtering through your deck, filling your graveyard, and then Delirium. If you have 4 more card types in your graveyard, it gets +2/+2 as flying and attacks each combat if able, so it turns into a 3/3 flyer. My guess with this card is even though it's powerful, it's not quite as good as the trinity of red 1-drops in Modern, which is Swift Spear, Soulscar Mage, Goblin Guide. Those are kind of the ones that normally take up the slots in red aggro style decks. Can Dragon's Rage Channeler beat them out? My guess is no. Starting with 1 toughness means Lavadar is going to kill it. That is a weakness compared to the other 1-drops. If you can't turn it on, it does turn into a pseudo Delver of Secrets. I mean, it can be a 1 mana 3 powered flyer. How quickly you can turn it on remains to be seen. I mean, we've had Gnarlwood Dryad in the format for a while, which turns into a 3/3. It's a ground creature, but it does get Death Touch, and it hasn't really done anything. So I'm actually a little skeptical this card's going to be busted, but I've seen some very good players talking about how they really like the card for Modern, so maybe it's better than I'm giving it credit for. We also got Herd Baloth, which is notable for one reason. Yesterday, we talked about the Squirrel Twin combo. Scurry Oak, Ivy League Denizen, play them, infinite squirrels by putting counters on Scurry Oak. Well, Herd Baloth does the same thing with Ivy League Denizen. You play the Denizen, you play the Herd Baloth, that puts a counter on the Herd Baloth, which makes a token, which is green, which triggers Denizen to put a counter on the Herd Baloth. Well, Scurry Oak is definitely the scarier of the two cards because it's cheaper, more efficient, speeds up the combo. More options to do the same thing is a big deal. Redundancy for your combo. So if you're going to try to play Squirrel Twin, keep Baloth in mind. I know Beast Twin doesn't sound as cool, but it is still a pretty effective way to win the game, and you get even bigger tokens. Finally today, in the new to Modern reprint slot, the bonus slot that you can get multiple rares or mythics in the same pack, we have some absolute all-stars today as far as cards that I think are actually going to see a lot of play in Modern. So first off, Imperial Recruiter, infamous combo finder. 3 mana 1/1 that when it enters the battlefield, you find a creature with power 2 or less. In Modern, it finds all the pieces of the Kiki Jiki combo, for example. You can get Kiki, Pesterbite, Deceiver, Exarch. So probably could see play there. Maybe it'll bring the Kiki combo archetype back to prominence. Also gets Devoted to Vizier Remedies if you're trying to combo that way. Or maybe you just play it for value. The other place that Imperial Recruiter sees play in Legacy is in like Taxes style decks, where your creatures mostly are already going to have 2 power or less, and you're often putting your Ether Vial on 3 for like Flicker Wisp and Skyclave Apparition, and those decks can just play Imperial Recruiter for value. So this new cheap creature tutor, definitely worth keeping in mind. Also, $30 card in a bonus slot, so not going to complain about that. We also got Flame Rift, which might look weird. Like, why would you want to play a 2 mana burn spell that did 4 damage to each player when you consider that 4 damage for 2 mana is a pretty above the curve rate? That's like Boros Charm rate, a card that sees a lot of play in Modern Burn. And that if you're playing Flame Rift, you're probably playing a burn deck, and 4 damage to you is way more valuable than 4 damage to your opponent because you're just trying to get them to 0 as quickly as possible by casting a few spells. I think that Flame Rift almost certainly going to be included in Modern burn strategies and greatly power them up. Having 2 mana 4 damage burn spells going to be a big deal. Ignore the fact that it hurts you a bit. You don't really care because your life total is going to be higher than your opponent's. We also get Quirion Ranger, a all-star from Legacy Elves. 1 mana 1/1 Elf Ranger. Bounce a forest to your hand to untap a creature. In Modern Elves, this can allow for some incredibly explosive turns. Untapping your Elvish Archdruid or Llanowar Elves or Elvish Mystic is really crazy. You can do some really big fast mana things. On the other hand, Quirion Ranger doesn't solve Elves' problem of getting wrecked by a sweeper, so we'll have to see, but I do think this card gonna show up in the Modern Elf decks. We also got Soul Snare, which is kind of a twist on Path to Exile. 1 mana enchantment, pay 1 sack, exile a creature that's attacking you or a planeswalker you control. Could this be a Path to Exile replacement? I think in most decks the answer is no. Your opponent sees it on the battlefield, so they get to make the decision on whether they want to attack because they know you can activate it. Plus, you're never going to get like an Eidolon or a Dark Confidant, which generate value just sitting on the battlefield and not attacking. However, if you're playing Enchantress, then this goes way up in value because it's a 1-mana enchantment to trigger all of your Enchantress effects, plus a reasonable removal spell. So I think it has implications in a narrow set of archetypes, but in general, you're not going to replace your Path to Exile with it. We also got Seal of Cleansing, which is Seal of Primordium, the original Seal of Primordium, but it might be relevant for Modern because it's in better Lurrus colors, and being able to loop Artifact Enchantment Hate with Lurrus seems really powerful in some matchups, and white is just way more on theme with Lurrus' colors than green for Seal of Primordium. We also got Mirari's Wake, a super duper powerful card that I don't know if it has a home in Modern. 5 mana, pumps all your creatures +1/+1, and doubles the mana from your lands. Can this beat out something like Nissa, which is really, really strong? I'm not really sure. In a lot of ways, Mirari's Wake is kind of like Fair Nissa, although it does work with like Niv-Mizzet Reborn as a dual color card. It is an enchantment, so it works well in Enchantress style strategies, and it is a card where if you untap with it and you have double mana, if there's one thing we've learned over the last few years, is that being the player with double mana means you're probably going to win the game. So it's certainly powerful, although compared to some of the more recent mana doublers, it does look a little bit fair. So we'll have to wait and see. Worst case, it's another high value reprint, $20, $25, a card that shows up in Commander decks. So even if it doesn't make waves in Modern, it's a good card to get more copies, and it's coming in the bonus slot. Finally, we have the card I'm most excited about from today's reprints, Upheaval. I love me some Upheaval action. So 6 mana, bounce everything, including lands, to their owner's hands. Is this card going to be good in Modern? It might be. I'm certainly going to try to make it good. So how do you play Upheaval? The answer is you make a lot of mana. So Upheaval, it's what I consider a light bulb card. When you just read it, bounce everyone's permanents. That doesn't sound that good. It bounces my stuff too. But when you realize what Upheaval actually does and how powerful it is, it's one of those aha moments that makes you realize all the things that Magic cards can do. At least that's how it was for me. So how does Upheaval work? The idea is you make a ton of mana. You play your Arbroths, Utopia Sprawls, Nissa, try to get up to like 10 mana, 12 mana, 20 mana, the more the better, and then you float all of your mana, so then you Upheaval for 6 of it, but still have a bunch of mana left over. You get to redeploy a bunch of your stuff. Like, imagine casting this and then playing multiple Mana Dorks and a Nissa. Your opponent's stuff's all gone. It's all in their hand. Your opponent's going to untap on their turn. They're going to play a single land. One land, they're going to discard essentially everything to their hand size and not really have any realistic chance to win the game. So, of course, in Modern, it gets countered by Force and Negation. It gets got by Spell Pierce. There's a lot of things that this can go wrong. There's a lot of ways that it can go wrong, but oh my goodness, when Upheaval works, it is so sweet. And we have a lot of fast mana. I think there's a chance. I'm going to try hard to make it work. This is one of my favorite cube cards. I cannot wait to start brewing Upheaval decks for Modern. I don't even care if they're good. If I could just get you once with it, it will all be worth it. And that brings us to the end of another insanely huge, insanely exciting day of Modern Horizons 2 spoilers. Again, no big wrap up today. It's already been a long one. Let me know what you like. What are you hyped for? What do you not like? Are you buying a box? Are you buying singles? Let me know in the comments. I'll be back tomorrow to talk more Modern Horizons 2 spoilers. So until then, everyone, have an amazing day. Enjoy Modern Horizons 2. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.